David Harris was the embodiment of success. As a prosperous dentist in the affluent Houston suburb of Clear Lake, Texas, David was a man who seemed to have it all. Tall, good-looking, and charming, he had built a thriving dental practice over the years, earning a reputation for his professionalism and genuine care for his patients. By all appearances, David led a picture-perfect life, supported by his loving wife of 10 years, Clara, and their young daughter, Lindsay. Clara, a beautiful, well-spoken woman originally from Colombia, had also made her mark in Houston society. She had earned a degree in dentistry and worked alongside her husband at their joint practice. Together, they were known as a power couple, admired and respected by their peers, always immaculately dressed, and often seen attending lavish social events in the city. Their marriage seemed like something out of a storybook, with David and Clara presenting themselves as the quintessential couple, deeply in love, supportive of each other's careers, and proud of the life they had built together. Clara was known for her warm personality, hosting charity events and social gatherings, all while balancing motherhood and a career in the demanding field of dentistry. But beneath the surface of this seemingly flawless marriage lurked dark secrets, lies, and betrayal that would eventually lead to a gruesome and public tragedy, one that would capture the attention of the nation. In the summer of 2002, Clara's world began to unravel. Although she had always trusted David, Clara had started to notice subtle changes in his behavior. He had become distant, often staying late at work or making excuses to leave the house for business meetings that seemed suspiciously long. He no longer seemed as affectionate toward her, and the spark that had once defined their marriage was now fading. Despite her growing unease, Clara didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. She had worked hard to build her family, and she wasn't willing to accept that her marriage might be in trouble. However, as the days went on, her suspicions only grew stronger. Finally, unable to ignore the signs any longer, Clara made the difficult decision to hire a private investigator to follow David and uncover the truth. What the investigator found would shatter Clara's world. David was having an affair with a younger woman named Gail Bridges, a receptionist at his dental practice. Over the course of several weeks, the investigator documented their secret meetings, lunches at discreet restaurants, stolen kisses in parking lots, and eventually a rendezvous at a local hotel. The evidence was undeniable. David was cheating on Clara, and it was clear that his affair with Gail wasn't just a passing fling. It was something deeper, more serious. When the private investigator presented Clara with the evidence of David's infidelity, she was devastated. The man she had loved and trusted for a decade had betrayed her in the most painful way imaginable. Clara's heartbreak quickly turned into anger, and that anger soon transformed into a burning desire for revenge. Clara confronted David with the evidence of his affair, expecting him to deny it or beg for forgiveness. But instead of a heartfelt apology, David's reaction was cold and detached. He admitted to the affair, but seemed more concerned with keeping up appearances than mending their marriage. He assured Clara that he would end things with Gail, but his lack of remorse and emotional distance only fueled her rage. Despite David's assurances, Clara wasn't convinced that he had truly ended the affair. She had seen how deeply involved he was with Gail, and she wasn't willing to let things go so easily. The anger inside her grew stronger each day, consuming her thoughts and leaving her restless at night. Determined to catch David in the act one final time, Clara once again hired the private investigator to track his every move. She wanted concrete proof that David was still seeing Gail, and she was prepared to confront them both in person. On July 24, 2002, Clara received a call from the investigator, informing her that David had checked into a hotel with Gail. This was the moment Clara had been waiting for. Fueled by rage and heartbreak, she grabbed the keys to her Mercedes-Benz, placed her stepdaughter Lindsay in the car, and drove to the Nassau Bay Hilton, where her husband and his mistress were staying. The Nassau Bay Hilton was a popular hotel in the area, known for its luxurious accommodations and scenic views of the nearby bay. It was the perfect place for David and Gail to carry on their illicit affair without drawing too much attention. But on this particular day, the hotel would become the site of a deadly confrontation that no one could have predicted. When Clara arrived at the hotel, she parked her car in the lot and waited. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she watched the entrance, waiting for David and Gail to emerge. When they finally did, walking hand in hand toward Gail's car, something inside Clara snapped. She could no longer contain her fury. Without thinking, Clara floored the gas pedal and drove her Mercedes straight toward them. David and Gail barely had time to react before the car barreled toward them at full speed. Gail managed to leap out of the way, but David wasn't so lucky. Clara's car struck David with a sickening thud, sending his body crashing to the pavement. But Clara didn't stop. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, she circled the parking lot and ran over David's body again, this time ensuring that he would never get up again. The entire incident was witnessed by hotel staff, guests, and security cameras. As horrified onlookers screamed for her to stop, Clara finally brought the car to a halt. Lindsay, who had been in the car during the entire incident, was left sobbing and hysterical as her father lay motionless on the ground. David Harris was dead, and Clara, his wife of 10 years, had just killed him in a fit of jealous rage. Within minutes of the attack, police arrived at the scene and took Clara into custody. She was still in shock, unable to fully comprehend what she had just done. Her once beautiful face was now twisted with grief and disbelief as she was handcuffed and led away by officers. The story of David Harris's murder spread like wildfire, captivating the nation. Clara's dramatic act of revenge had all the makings of a tabloid sensation. A handsome husband, a scorned wife, and a fatal act of betrayal that had played out in broad daylight at a luxury hotel. The media quickly dubbed Clara the Mercedes murderer, and news outlets across the country began to dissect every detail of the case. Friends and neighbors who had once admired the Harris family were shocked by the tragedy. How could a woman as kind and loving as Clara commit such a heinous act? How had their marriage fallen apart so completely that it ended in murder? These questions dominated the headlines as the public eagerly awaited Clara's trial. Clara's trial began in February 2003, just 7 months after David's murder. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal experts, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the outcome of one of the most sensational murder trials in recent memory. Clara's defense team argued that she had acted in the heat of the moment, driven by overwhelming emotions after discovering her husband's affair. They painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed to the brink by her husband's betrayal and who had simply lost control in a moment of emotional turmoil. They pleaded for leniency, urging the jury to consider the circumstances that had led to David's death. But the prosecution painted a much darker picture of Clara. They argued that her actions had been premeditated, pointing to the fact that she had hired a private investigator to track David and had deliberately driven to the hotel with the intention of confronting him. The prosecution also highlighted the brutality of the attack, noting that Clara had not only run over David once, but had circled the parking lot and hit him again to ensure his death. The most damning evidence came in the form of surveillance footage from the hotel's security cameras, which had captured the entire incident. The grainy video showed Clara's car speeding toward David and striking him with full force. It also showed her circling the parking lot and running over his body a second time, leaving little doubt as to her intent. The jury was shown the footage repeatedly, and it became the centerpiece of the trial. As they watched the horrifying scene unfold, it became increasingly clear that Clara's actions had gone far beyond a momentary lapse in judgment. This was not just an act of passion, it was murder. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just a few hours before reaching a verdict. On March 26, 2003, Clara Harris was found guilty of murder. Despite the defense's plea for leniency, the jury had been swayed by the overwhelming evidence of Clara's guilt. The brutal nature of the attack, combined with the security footage and eyewitness testimony, had sealed her fate. The judge sentenced Clara to 20 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed for a conviction of murder with sudden passion under Texas law. The sentence was a blow to Clara, who had hoped for a more lenient outcome. She wept openly in court as the sentence was read, her once glamorous life now reduced to a prison cell. David Harris's family expressed relief at the verdict, though their grief over his loss was still palpable. They had lost a son, a brother, and a father, and no sentence could bring him back. For them, justice had been served, but the pain of his death would linger for the rest of their lives. Clara Harris's trial and conviction marked the end of one of the most sensational murder cases in recent history, but the aftermath of the tragedy continued to reverberate for years to come. Clara's actions had torn apart not only her own family but also the lives of those who had once been close to the Harris family. Lindsay, Clara's stepdaughter, had witnessed the entire murder and was left traumatized by the event. She had been close to her father and had idolized her stepmother, but now she was left with conflicting emotions of grief, anger, and confusion. She would later testify at Clara's trial, recounting the horrifying moments in the parking lot that had led to her father's death. Gail Bridges, the woman at the center of the affair, quickly retreated from the public eye. She had been vilified in the media, with many blaming her for the destruction of the Harris family. Though she had survived the attack, her life had been irreparably damaged by the events that had unfolded. As for Clara, she spent the next 2 decades in a Texas prison, reflecting on the choices that had led her to that fateful day in the parking lot of the Nassau Bay Hilton. She became a model inmate, taking part in educational programs and mentoring other women, but the weight of her crime never left her. The murder of David Harris is a tragic story of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of unchecked rage. Clara Harris, once a loving wife and mother, allowed her jealousy and anger to consume her, leading her to commit an act of violence that shocked the nation. David's death serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the destructive power of betrayal and the importance of confronting our emotions before they spiral out of control. Clara's story is a testament to the fact that even the most seemingly perfect lives can unravel in an instant, and the consequences can be deadly. While the trial had officially ended with Clara's conviction, the emotional aftermath of the murder continued to impact those closest to the tragedy. David Harris's family, especially his children, were left devastated by the sudden and violent loss of their father. While Clara's own stepdaughter, Lindsay, had witnessed the murder firsthand, David's 2 other children, twin boys from his previous marriage, were shielded from the gory details but faced their own grief. The family's fracture became evident in the following months. Lindsay, who had been so close to her stepmother Clara, felt torn apart by conflicting emotions. She was angry at Clara for killing her father, but at the same time she couldn't erase years of love and bonding they had shared. How could she reconcile those 2 worlds? Her admiration for the stepmother who raised her, and the woman who had murdered her father in a moment of madness? Counselors and psychologists worked with the Harris children to help them process the trauma. But this emotional damage wasn't easy to mend. They weren't just mourning their father's death, they were mourning the entire life they once had, a life that would never return. Publicly, David's family distanced themselves from Clara, condemning her actions and describing her as a jealous, unstable woman. But privately, the emotional ties between family members, especially between Lindsay and Clara, were harder to break. Clara, in turn, expressed remorse and wrote letters to Lindsay from prison, trying to explain herself. The letters went unanswered for years. In trying to understand Clara's drastic actions, many began to reflect on the cracks in the Harris marriage that had led to this horrific tragedy. While David had appeared to be a successful, loving husband and father, it soon became clear that his affair with Gail Bridges wasn't his first infidelity. Rumors emerged that David had been involved with multiple women throughout his marriage, leading to an undercurrent of dissatisfaction and mistrust between the couple that had been building for years. Clara, though always outwardly cheerful and devoted to her husband, had begun to feel increasingly isolated. The demands of David's career and his constant flirtations had left her feeling unappreciated. As David spent more and more time away from home, Clara found herself alone with her insecurities. Many wondered if David's emotional neglect had played a role in Clara's downward spiral. Friends and acquaintances who knew the Harris couple recalled how Clara had seemed increasingly anxious in the months leading up to the murder. She often confided in close friends that she was worried about her marriage and suspected that David wasn't being faithful. But while she had fears, no one expected them to boil over into such violence. A particularly tragic detail that emerged was how Clara had sought therapy to try to work through her feelings. She had attended marriage counseling with David just months before the murder, in a last-ditch effort to save their relationship. While David went through the motions, he seemed to treat the sessions as a formality, an attempt to appease Clara, but without any real intent to change. For Clara, the realization that David was not only unfaithful but emotionally detached was devastating. Friends said that while she tried to maintain her composure, she had reached a breaking point in the weeks leading up to the murder. The discovery of David's affair with Gail Bridges felt like the final betrayal, the moment where everything Clara feared became reality. Clara's adjustment to life in prison was swift and jarring. For a woman who had once lived in a large, elegant home, attended social functions, and enjoyed the luxuries of an upper-middle-class life, the confines of a Texas state prison were a harsh new reality. But Clara, ever resilient, adapted quickly. She became a model prisoner, participating in educational programs, counseling, and eventually mentoring other inmates. She worked hard to regain some sense of purpose, even within the walls of her prison. Clara's relationship with her own family also shifted dramatically after her conviction. While many of her friends distanced themselves from her, some of her family members stood by her side. Her mother, in particular, continued to visit regularly and publicly expressed her belief that Clara had acted out of immense emotional pain rather than calculated malice. Clara also participated in multiple interviews from prison over the years. In some of these, she expressed deep remorse for her actions, stating that she never intended to kill David, but that her emotions had overwhelmed her in the moment. She emphasized that she had loved her husband deeply and could never have imagined taking his life under normal circumstances. But her words often rang hollow to David's family, who remained steadfast in their belief that Clara had intentionally murdered him out of jealousy and rage. While Clara's time in prison was largely uneventful, she did experience moments of reflection that changed her perspective on her crime. She became involved in prison outreach programs, where she helped counsel other women who had committed violent crimes, many of them in moments of passion, much like herself. Through these interactions, Clara began to see herself not as a victim, but as someone who had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The murder of David Harris became a landmark case in Texas, particularly in how it was covered by the media. The trial, the crime, and the personalities involved had all the elements of a tabloid sensation: a wealthy couple, a salacious affair, a violent public murder, and a scorned woman behind the wheel of a luxury car. The case also sparked broader discussions about crimes of passion and the role emotions play in violent acts. Many legal experts debated whether Clara's actions constituted premeditated murder or whether she had acted in a fit of uncontrollable emotion, and the idea of sudden passion became central to how juries would view similar cases in the future. The surveillance footage from the Nassau Bay Hilton parking lot became iconic, symbolizing the raw, unfiltered nature of violent crime. It was repeatedly shown on news networks and analyzed by experts, leaving a lasting impression on the public. It became a chilling reminder of how quickly life can spiral out of control when jealousy and anger take hold. Moreover, the media frenzy surrounding the case helped to shape how future cases of domestic violence and marital infidelity would be discussed. The public's fascination with Clara Harris was part of a larger trend in true crime, where complex emotionally charged cases involving betrayal, infidelity, and murder garnered intense interest. Clara became a household name, synonymous with a scorned woman taking justice into her own hands. Even after more than a decade in prison, the questions surrounding Clara's case remain as complex as ever. Was Clara Harris a cold-blooded murderer who planned to kill her husband? Or was she simply a woman pushed to her breaking point, whose emotions overtook her rational mind in a single moment of madness? Legal experts and psychologists who reviewed the case continued to explore the psychology behind crimes of passion. Clara had acted in a brief window of extreme emotional distress, fueled by betrayal and humiliation. Some believed that, had she been given a moment to cool down, she might never have committed such an act. Others, however, pointed to the deliberate way she had circled back and run over David a second time as proof of intent to kill. The case also raised questions about how the legal system treats crimes of passion, particularly when it comes to sentencing. Clara received the maximum sentence of 20 years, a relatively lenient punishment for murder, especially given the violent nature of David's death. Some believed that Clara had been treated too lightly, while others argued that her sentence was fair, considering the emotional context in which the crime occurred. Clara herself has expressed regret, though she still struggles with fully understanding why she acted the way she did. In her interviews from prison, she often spoke about how much she loved David and how the affair with Gail had devastated her. But even after years of reflection, the murder still seemed to be something she couldn't fully comprehend or justify. Clara Harris became eligible for parole after serving more than 15 years in prison. In February 2018, she was granted release, sparking renewed public interest in the case. Now, in her 60s, Clara emerged from prison a very different woman from the glamorous, high-society wife she had once been. Her release was met with mixed reactions. Some felt that she had served her time and deserved a second chance, while others, particularly members of David's family, continued to express outrage that she was free at all. Following her release, Clara sought to live a quiet life, away from the spotlight. She moved in with family and largely disappeared from public view. Though she had been the subject of countless news reports and true crime documentaries over the years, Clara seemed intent on closing that chapter of her life for good. But for the family and friends of David Harris, the pain of his loss remained. They continued to speak out about the impact his death had on their lives, and they expressed their ongoing belief that Clara's actions had been motivated by jealousy and control. For them, there could never be true closure. The murder of David Harris remains a cautionary tale about the dangerous consequences of unchecked emotions and betrayal. Clara Harris's life, once filled with success and stability, was completely destroyed by her inability to cope with the realization that her husband had been unfaithful. In the heat of the moment, Clara's rage overtook her, leading her to commit a violent act that would haunt her for the rest of her life. David's death, a horrifying consequence of infidelity, has left a legacy of broken lives, children without a father, a family without a son, and a wife without her freedom. The case continues to serve as a grim reminder that love, betrayal, and jealousy can combine into a lethal mix, with consequences that last far beyond the moment of violence.